Living on the coast has always been a dream for many people, but anyone who has spent enough time near the ocean knows that paradise comes with its dangers. For me, the danger wasn't a secret. I had lived by the sea long enough to know its power. The storms could be unpredictable, the tides unforgiving, and erosion was the quiet enemy that slowly ate away at properties without mercy. That's why, years ago, I invested heavily in building a reinforced concrete sea wall behind my home. It wasn't cheap. Between hiring contractors, getting the permits, and sourcing materials strong enough to withstand hurricane-level storms, the wall cost me close to 6 figures. But I didn't see it as optional, I saw it as insurance against the inevitable. When waves slammed against the coast, I could hear them crashing, but inside my home, I had peace of mind knowing that the sea wall was standing between me and disaster. To me, it was common sense. To my neighbors, and especially the HOA, it was an eyesore. From the day the wall was finished, HOA Karen made it her personal mission to complain about it. Karen was the president of our neighborhood's HOA and carried herself like she owned not only her house but everyone else's too. She loved hosting little wine and cheese meetings on her back deck where she could show off the uninterrupted view of the ocean. Except, in her mind, my sea wall was a scar on her perfect horizon. It ruins the natural beauty, she whined at one of the HOA meetings, holding her glass of Chardonnay like she was delivering a TED Talk. When we bought these homes, we were promised oceanfront views. That monstrosity looks like something out of a military base. I pointed out, as calmly as I could, that the monstrosity was the only thing keeping my property from turning into a swimming pool during the next storm surge. I even explained how the wall didn't just protect me, it helped slow erosion for neighboring properties too. But logic and science didn't matter to Karen. She wrinkled her nose and declared, "It lowers property values. No one wants to buy $1 million beach home just to stare at concrete." After that, the letters started. At first, they were the standard HOA reminders about community aesthetics. Then came the violation notices. They claimed my wall violated view ordinances, though when I asked to see where that was written in our HOA bylaws, Karen waved vaguely at a binder and said, "It's implied." The harassment wasn't just on paper. Neighbors started dropping comments whenever I was outside. "Shame about that wall, really blocks the sunset," one would mutter. "Why couldn't you just put in sand dunes like the rest of us?" another asked. I tried to explain, again and again, that dunes weren't enough. But they didn't want to hear it. The HOA had created a narrative: I was selfish, ruining the view for everyone else, and lowering their property values. What they didn't realize, or maybe just refused to acknowledge, was that I had warned them. At multiple meetings, I stood up and explained how erosion worked. I showed articles about similar coastal neighborhoods where homes had been condemned because protective barriers were removed. I even offered to share the engineering report from my contractor that detailed how the wall was necessary for safety. But to Karen, none of that mattered. She'd scrunch her nose, wave her manicured hand, and say something like, "We live here for beauty, not for concrete." If we wanted to look at walls, we'd live inland. Every month, the pressure ramped up. Fines started rolling in, hundreds of dollars at first, then thousands. They claimed the wall was unauthorized construction, even though I had city permits proving otherwise. When I brought those permits to a meeting, Karen dismissed them, saying, "HOA rules supersede city permits. You agreed to them when you bought here." I could see the writing on the wall, pun intended. This wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about control. Karen loved throwing her weight around, and the sea wall was her perfect target. The HOA had decided that my responsible, protective investment was an enemy to their beachfront fantasy, and they weren't going to stop until it was gone. Still, I held my ground. I paid the fines under protest, documented every letter and meeting, and refused to schedule demolition. I told them plainly, "If you take this wall down, you're not just putting my home at risk, you're putting the entire neighborhood in danger. The ocean doesn't care about your property values." Karen rolled her eyes. Drama much? She wasn't the only one. Most of the HOA board nodded along with her, sipping their wine and laughing about how I was paranoid. They were convinced the ocean was something to admire, not something to fear. Little did they know, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. By the time the HOA fines against me climbed into the thousands, I knew I had to fight back. I wasn't just going to roll over and let a pack of wine-drunk neighbors and their queen bee, Karen, bully me into destroying the one thing keeping my home safe. I hired an attorney and handed him the stack of letters, fines, and violation notices the HOA had sent. He chuckled at first, flipping through the papers. "They're trying to supersede city permits," he said, raising an eyebrow. "That's ambitious." We drafted a formal response to the HOA. The wall was fully permitted, inspected, and legally built. Their so-called violations were baseless. If they wanted to continue fining me, we'd see them in court. For a while, that seemed to shut them up. But Karen wasn't the type to take no for an answer. At the next HOA meeting, she whipped up the crowd like a preacher at a revival. "This wall is a blight on our community," she declared, pointing dramatically in my direction. "It doesn't matter what papers he waves around, it ruins our views and our property values. We have a responsibility to protect this neighborhood." The board voted, unanimously, to pursue legal action. I was officially public enemy number one. The weeks that followed were exhausting. HOA lawyers sent demand letters. They tried to argue that, under the HOA's view preservation clause, my wall constituted an unauthorized obstruction. My lawyer countered with city code, storm protection ordinances, and property rights. Back and forth it went, an expensive game of legal ping-pong. I honestly thought common sense would prevail. Surely, the city wouldn't let a neighborhood HOA dictate the destruction of approved infrastructure designed to prevent storm damage. But I underestimated just how much influence a determined HOA could wield. Karen and her cronies showed up at city council meetings. They filed complaints. They wrote letters about how my wall was an environmental hazard and unnatural. They spun tales about how it disrupted the natural coastline, endangered turtles, and made the neighborhood less marketable. And slowly, it worked. City inspectors showed up at my property, clipboards in hand. They measured, photographed, and took notes. "We've had a number of complaints," one of them said, almost apologetically. "The HOA is pushing for us to review the structure." I argued, again, that I had permits. The wall was legal. It was safe. It was necessary. They nodded, scribbled notes, and told me they'd be in touch. The letter came a few weeks later. The city had sided with the HOA. They claimed the wall, while previously permitted, no longer conformed to the community's development standards. Unless I appealed, and risked an even longer, more expensive legal battle, the structure had to go. I'll never forget the day the demolition crew rolled up. Karen stood on her deck with a glass of champagne, watching like it was the 4th of July. A few other neighbors gathered, clapping and cheering as the backhoe smashed into the concrete barrier I had spent so much money and effort building. I stood there, numb, as the wall crumbled piece by piece. All I could think about was the storms I'd seen over the years, the waves that had battered the coast, and the quiet devastation of erosion. I wanted to scream at them, "You idiots don't know what you've done." But I didn't. I just turned, walked back inside, and shut the door. Karen and the HOA thought they'd won. They thought they'd saved the view. What they didn't realize was that the ocean had just been given an open invitation to reclaim its territory, and it was only a matter of time before it accepted. High voltage. It didn't take long for nature to deliver its verdict. The summer after my wall was demolished, storm season came early. At first, it was just stronger than usual tides. Waves that used to crash harmlessly against my sea wall now slammed directly into the open shoreline. I watched from my porch as the sand began to pull away, dragged back into the ocean with every surge. Neighbors who once sipped wine while mocking my eyesore started to notice their yards shrinking. Lawns that had been neatly manicured were suddenly dotted with sinkholes where the ground had collapsed. Fences began to tilt, and patios developed cracks. Karen brushed it off at first, waving her hand like she always did. "Oh, it's just seasonal erosion. It'll settle," she told a group of worried homeowners. But the ocean wasn't done. By late August, a tropical storm rolled in. Nothing catastrophic, at least, not by coastal standards. But without the sea wall, it might as well have been a Category 5 hurricane. Waves rose high, hammering against the beachfront homes like a battering ram. I stood at my window, heart pounding, as water surged over the HOA's prized open view. Karen's $1 million deck? Gone in a single night. One wave lifted the wooden planks like matchsticks and carried them out to sea. The homes next to hers fared no better, their landscaping washed away, their seawalls, decorative little stone barriers meant for show, not strength, crumbled like sandcastles. The panic set in fast. I could hear shouting outside as neighbors scrambled with sandbags and makeshift barriers. Flashlights bobbed in the rain as people tried to salvage their outdoor furniture, their planters, even their grills. But it was useless. Once the water breached the foundations, it was game over. Basements filled like bathtubs, and garages turned into swimming pools. And still, Karen insisted it wasn't that bad. "It's temporary," she screamed at a cluster of neighbors huddled in raincoats. "We'll get repairs done after the storm passes. Insurance will cover it." But I could see it in their faces. They knew she was lying, maybe even to herself. The final blow came in September. Not a storm, not a hurricane, just an unusually high tide combined with steady winds. With no barrier, the ocean simply marched inland like it owned the place. I walked down the street the next morning to survey the damage, and my jaw dropped. Karen's home, the crown jewel of the neighborhood, had a gaping hole where her living room used to be. Saltwater had poured in and eaten away at the foundation until the floor collapsed. Entire walls were leaning at awkward angles, ready to cave in with the next big swell. The property next door had fared no better. Its pool was filled with seawater, sand, and debris, the tiles cracked and warped. The once pristine row of $1 million homes looked like something out of a disaster movie. Meanwhile, my house stood solid. Vulnerable, yes, without the wall, I had to reinforce with temporary measures, but my foundation was intact. The irony wasn't lost on me. The HOA had forced me to take down the very thing that could have protected not just me, but all of them. Word spread fast. Neighbors who once parroted Karen's lines about ruined views, now whispered in hushed tones about how right I had been. A few even approached me, soaking wet and shell-shocked, to mutter apologies. But it was too late. The sea had claimed its prize. The ocean doesn't care about property values, HOA bylaws, or Chardonnay-fueled rants about aesthetics. It only cares about physics, and physics always wins. The storm season passed, but the damage didn't. What the ocean had taken, it wasn't giving back. Karen's home, once the centerpiece of the HOA brochures, the one she used to brag about to guests, was condemned within weeks. City inspectors came out, shook their heads at the collapsed foundation, and slapped bright orange, unsafe stickers on the door. The insurance company, after weeks of back and forth, denied most of her claim. Their reason? The HOA had knowingly demolished an approved protective structure. Translation: you did this to yourself. Karen tried to fight it, of course. She marched into meetings with folders of paperwork, blaming everyone but herself. At one point, she even tried to pin the responsibility on me, claiming my wall had been diverting waves in a way that damaged her property. That argument collapsed as quickly as her deck when the city pulled up the demolition order, signed by the HOA, authorized under her leadership. The lawsuit started next. Homeowners who had sided with her turned on her fast. They filed claims against the HOA board for negligence, arguing that they'd been misled into thinking demolishing my wall was harmless. What started as smug unity over protecting the view splintered into chaos. Meetings devolved into screaming matches. Resignations rolled in. Karen clung to her presidency like a sinking captain refusing to leave the ship, but even she couldn't deny the obvious. The ocean had taken their $1 million houses, and there was no fixing it. I won't pretend I wasn't bitter. Watching neighbors who mocked me scramble to salvage their properties felt like cosmic justice. I had warned them again and again. They laughed. They fined me. They literally tore down my protection in the name of views. And now? Those views came with a front row seat to disaster. Still, there was a strange sadness to it all. These weren't just houses, they were dreams. Families had sunk their life savings into these places, all because they believed the HOA's promises of luxury coastal living. Now, those dreams were washing out to sea, brick by brick, board by board. As for me, I reinforced what I could with temporary barriers. I was furious, yes, but I wasn't reckless enough to live without protection. With the HOA collapsing under lawsuits and financial ruin, they had bigger problems than trying to police me anymore. For the first time in years, I was free of their constant harassment. Karen, though. She couldn't let it go. I saw her once, weeks after her house had been condemned. She stood at the edge of the beach, staring at the water, clutching a folder of papers like they meant anything against the tide. She looked smaller somehow, no longer the smug queen beholding court over her domain. Just another person who thought she could outsmart the ocean. But the ocean doesn't care about HOA rules. It doesn't care about property values or ruined views. It cares about physics, erosion, and inevitability. In the end, all Karen's vanity bought her was ruin. And the irony? The very wall she had called a monstrosity might have saved her home. Instead, she got her precious view, right up until the sea swallowed it whole.